What is a man but a butt and a brain and a heart and your lungs and some gonads?
Today on the Manspace. Welcome to the Manspace podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter. I guess we should have saved that for when we actually do that book.
Just say it's a teaser.
Nope, it's too late. We already used it.
If you know what book that is, you're already a manspacer or spaceman or
Spaceman.
Crap.
Welcome, Spaceman. That are nothing but a brain and a butt and some gonads.
Don't forget heart and lungs, Rob. We got those too.
That's a teaser for our book in 2 book clubs from now. That's how.
like 2
that's
months.
how organized we
Look
are.
how
We
on
got
the
books
ball
in
we are.
advance. I got books for days. That was delightful. I think we should just call it.
Was that a Saturday Night Live sketch?
From the 90s.
I was going to do
When it was good.
I was going to do my intro was going to be Ich liebe Stutz today on the Manspace.
Well, save that for the end, dang it.
I just ruined it. I'm not going to take time to edit that out. I don't take time to edit crap. You know what's really fun is getting AI to generate our little thumbnails for YouTube.
Like the pictures, huh?
But I still haven't paid for ChatGPT's full thing. So it only ever gives me 3 options. And I was like, guess that one's going to have to work.
Did I ever show you the image that it generated for Robo Crotch, the movie?
Oh, yeah. No.
Wait, did you?
Yes. Robo
That guy's brain, dude. He came up with the weirdest stuff.
I still, every time I hear that, I think of Damon. RoboCop likes to drop. I guess we should do some stuff.
Nah. Everyone loves this about our show.
Yep, everyone. It was actually, I had to delete it off of AI's generated show notes. It was like, they talk about how they like to meander and how some people like it and some people don't. That if they don't, they can go find a different show or something like that.
I think those people already have.
Go listen to Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Like we're taking his listeners. He's like, what's going on? There's this new podcast called The Manspace. It's not even actually that new.
They're taking all our listeners.
I saw some interview with him and Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
And Elon Musk, I was like, dude, he's like living his like middle school fantasy. He's like, I can't give you the names. He's like, honestly, I have to go back to DC. I'll get shot, man. And they're like laughing. He's like, oh, I'm serious. It's like, oh my gosh, dude, stop.
I don't think he was American.
He's
He's
not.
South African, right?
So
Yeah,
how
he's
does he get
something.
to have a government job?
He's like an appointee. He's not. It's not the same thing as.
Okay.
He's not an elected official.
Yeah. Okay.
But even that, it's. I don't know. There are various government jobs you can have without being born in the
naturalized
U.S.
citizen.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think it's
president
president for sure.
only. Yeah,
Yeah.
or maybe something else. I don't know. Who cares? Politics. They don't affect me at all. What I should be doing is voting for my city council. That affects the roads that go in by my house and the taxes that I pay to my city, where I actually live.
Yeah, it's sad. I don't even think I could name anybody on my city council.
I can name 2 people on a different city council.
Is it Washington, D.C.'s city council?
No.
Okay. It's the only city that matters.
What was I just thinking?
No, Rob can't say which city council it's for because that would be disclosing too
That's
much
true. I
information.
don't want to disclose anything. Hey, this is a different note. My wife and I just drove past Sun City. Matt, do you know what Sun City is?
Sun City?
Yeah.
Like an actual city or like a...
That's what I don't... I think so. It's like is it 65 plus neighborhood city? It's like they build there's grocery stores in there. There's a hospital
Like
in there.
in Austin?
It's in Georgetown.
Oh,
But it's like I was trying to figure out: do they have their own mayor? Like, is it a functioning city by itself?
I
No,
bet,
it's
'cause
part of
there's-
Georgetown.
okay.
It says
I
City
stand corrected.
Georgetown.
You don't know.
I just Googled it.
Well, Google. Do they have it? Google. Do they have
Sun
a
City,
council?
right next to Sudden Valley.
You remember the Goo Goo Dolls? Who sat in the room and was like, "Hey, what should we name our band?" It's like the Goo Goo Dolls, man. That sounds so cool. Seriously,
Yes.
sometimes I want to know the approval process on some of these things. Just like that song "Radio" by Queen. They're like, "No, it's good. We'll say
Radio
Radio Goo
Gaga.
Goo, Radio Gaga," over and over. It's like, okay, and it worked.
I'm trying to remember that song.
Radio Goo Goo. It's
Yeah. I already don't like it.
It's it's Queen, so it's catchy,
hey, did you guys? Have you guys?
but it's
this is-
irritating.
Also, what? Maybe we'll get into the podcast today. But have you guys ever listened to Muse?
To Muse?
No, just Muse. Isn't it just Muse?
That's what I said.
I thought it was the.
Oh, I thought you said the Muse.
No, I said to Muse.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, yes. And
They're
let me
kinda-
tell you my massive disillusionment.
Oh, because I kind of like them.
No, I like them. But, okay, so OK Computer by Radiohead is
Oh,
like one of the best albums of all time.
I just keep telling my daughter, I was like, this guy sounds just like Tom York.
Exactly. So, like, when their first album came out, back when all we had was radio,
Yeah.
I kept catching one of the songs like halfway through. So I just assumed like, oh, dude, this is like the new Radiohead album, and I
Yeah.
couldn't ever get the name of the song. So I go and buy the new Radiohead album, and I think at that point it was the one after Kid A, I think, and I was like, this blows, because it was when Radiohead went from like super sophisticated
Yeah.
like layering stuff to like, we have a cardboard box and a one-string guitar and Tom York. Like, what happened? So I was like, who is this band? And I could not figure it out. And then I finally figured out it was them. But yeah,
Dude,
they're really good.
To me, it sounds like if you mix, I don't know if you really listen to RX Bandits much, but it's
Yeah.
like if RX Bandits and Radiohead had a baby,
Yeah.
Muse popped out.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's all. You guys should listen. Also, I just recently, for the third time, bought an album from a band from the 90s in Seattle that was called The Green. Then they had to change their name because Green Day came out and got all big. They're like, well, we don't want to be confused with them. So they changed their name to Waffle Stomper. And I was listening to it. I was like, man, this is good. And also, I just found out what Waffle Stomper is.
The shoes, right?
No. Well, maybe. But apparently, it's also in Urban Dictionary. It's what you do if you poop in the shower and then you stomp it down the drain.
Like the waffle-shaped drain. No, I was going to say we called shoes that had like the big old
Yeah,
Like
I thought
big
it was.
docks
I
kind
thought it
of
was
thing.
clod
a shoe
hoppers and
thing.
waffle
Yeah.
stompers. And
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I thought it was. But
Yeah.
my kids were like,
Shower
yeah,
pooping
shove it
thing.
down the drain. My wife could not stop laughing.
that to me is less like a waffle stomper and more like a Play-Doh machine.
and here's where we
Not a
make
machine,
pasta.
but those little
Well, you can
those little guys.
you can
Yeah.
make the entry on Urban Dictionary. Clearly, we're not going to get. Apparently I'm not in the mood to discuss anything serious. We probably better get to Stutz. This reminds me of when the last time I did my ethics presentation with Michael Bishop, we kept talking about Wittgenstein,
Mhm.
and I cannot. I feel like you have to commit when you say that guy's name. You can't just say Wittgenstein.
Did he say wit?
He would say Wittgenstein.
Huh.
And he goes, I can't say this name now. He was presenting that slide. He's like, because Rob ruined it. And I like yelled out, I was like, it's Wittgenstein. And I'm sure I offended somebody in the room.
Dude, if I'd been there, I'd have been like Frankenstein.
That's what I feel like Michael Bishop probably tolerated me. I think I brought enough pros to the presentation that he overlooked my cons, like when I'd yell out Wittgenstein, like I'm
Do
hiling
you remember
Hitler.
that foosball episode of Community? And the
Yes.
guy's like, you must put your hands on the Fusenschaft.
Funny. All right. Well, Mike, you may not know this, but you're going to have to lead this discussion somewhat because it's your book.
I'm going to throw this out here as you do that.
Uh-oh.
Apparently, I should have read the tools first.
Yeah, I think so. His original book where he
I didn't read the
his
tools at
bestseller.
all.
I didn't
neither.
either, but I'm looking at it now, and like I think the tools kind of lay out like some of the fundamental like assumptions and theory behind everything, and then this book Rob was saying was like a collection of essays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I'll say this. So Spaceman, if you haven't read the book, shame on you. Pause this and go listen. You can, if you put it on double speed, you can listen in about 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Yeah. It's a quick read.
It's Lessons for Living, right? By Stutz,
Mm-hmm.
who he declares in the beginning, and this annoyed me, although he calls it out, that he's been called the psychiatrist for the stars. He's like, and that probably bothers you as much as it bothers me. Or something like that. And I was like, yes, it does. But then he said, and this really bothered me, both times I listened to it. He said, I was doing psychiatry and it didn't work. And then I figured out, we figured out the answer because it worked. And what I was like, oh, so you figured out how to make therapy work? And then he goes on to tell all these things. It's like, dude, so many other therapists. And this is what's interesting when you said there's no real new ideas out there. We're all just kind of regenerating. I thought this multiple times. Listening to this these are things that we've all talked about with our clients.
Yeah.
I've never read Stutz, so it's not like I got it from him.
Right.
And I actually thought too, he's just declaring this at the same time that family therapy was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of psychiatrists who said what we're doing doesn't work. And so they actually started looking, I think they took a more accurate approach of actually looking at like the systemic dynamics of things. And so you get Whitaker and Bowen and Mnuchin doing these same things. And it's just, they didn't declare, we found the answer. Like he describes it like, I found it. I got it. You're welcome, everybody.
Yeah.
And it felt like, okay.
I did.
But then I liked the book by the time.
I was going to say, I think that I'm trying to remember of some of the other books that we've talked about in the past, written by psychiatrists. I think one thing that they're all saying is not so much like the way that we did things didn't work,
right?
But people that just probably didn't turn their brains on, right, and just went through the motions because that's been established. Like that's what I'm bucking against. And there are plenty of those people in every field, but like, when you hear people talk about psychiatrists working in like psychiatric hospitals and like no one's getting better and like,
right. Yeah.
Not only that, but like nobody even cares that no one's getting better anymore, and it's like, well, we just got to keep doing the same thing. And so for someone to say, I'm going to do something totally different. I think anytime you do something like that in a stuck system, it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, and so much of what this is kind of like, Matt, when you've said that, you're like, you said something to your dad, like, hey, researchers showed us this. He's like, oh yeah, we had to have research tell us something that we all knew for years and years and years. Like, it's like, yeah, I was just it's kind of funny. I was trying to think through because Matt and I both said this book, the nature of the way this book flows to me was like it when it finishes, like, that's your finish. Like you just ended it. Like,
well, there's part of me, right. He talks about the fact that he found a bunch of past essays.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's one of those where at one point towards the end,
sorry, Rob's book's going off at random on his phone. Okay, go for it.
I was going to say at one point, like I thought for the most part, the chapters flowed together pretty well. But at one point towards the end, last probably 40 or 50 pages, it started to feel a little. Do you need me to pause some more, Rob?
Okay. Just throw your phone across the room.
I'm trying to look at the chapter titles to get a reference because they all flow together in such a way that's like sometimes he's overlapping and saying some of the same things. And so I'm trying to look at the chapter titles, and every time I touch one, it starts playing it.
It's like you have a touch screen phone over there.
I turn the volume down.
Anyway, like towards the end, it felt like they felt a little more disjointed to me. Where I thought it just became a little more obvious that I was like, oh, these are clearly like essays that you're putting together. And so I think he hit the end, and what he should have done to me is write a chapter that kind of
brings common themes
puts the
together
whole
or
thing
something
together. Yeah. But instead he was just like, well, I'm out of essays, so I guess I'm done.
So the end.
No, Rob had a good point about, it was probably a publisher saying like, hey, you just made this Netflix documentary. Let's make some more money off this. Just throw some essays together. Right. But I think that yeah, I mean, the book right before this probably captures a lot of like the cohesion
tools.
part of it. But yeah,
So that's so this book was actually recommended to me by a guy I know.
Is his name Wittgenstein?
Yes. That was his name. His name's Trent Church.
Does not
he's a
sound
nice
as
dude.
cool.
What now?
Doesn't
Not as cool
sound
as
as cool.
Wittgenstein.
Wittgenstein. Frankenstein.
It's Frankenstein.
Friedrich.
Frau
Continue.
Blucher. Anyway, and he kind of mentioned I think he's not a fan of the tools book.
Oh.
your friend wasn't.
Yeah, like this one. In fact, he even said like I was texting him last night, and this is kind of where I think we'll start, because I was texting him last night since like I haven't really had a chance to talk to him since I finished and knew we were coming to do this today. So I was like, I kind of want to know what his takes are on it, right? Like,
yeah.
But one of the things he said, I don't, however, believe in his tools that he uses. And so I thought, I know he had referenced the other book, and my memory was he didn't like the other book as much as this one.
Oh.
And that's the thing. Like, there was a handful of times reading this book where some of it felt like I never cared for the way he talked about the voice in the head. It kind of bothered me.
Part X.
Is that part X? I was like, is that supposed to be like your inner dialogue, or is that supposed to be Satan? Because he describes this as this higher power, and then part X, it was like, so God and Satan? What do you like? Yeah. It's like he dodged around that a little bit. Anyway.
Well, and that's like, I even asked, like, I was, we were, like at one point I asked my friend, I just kind of said, I wonder, because what did he say? He said, our society is pivoting back towards spirituality. Unfortunately, people like Stutz try and separate that spirituality from God. And I think that's true, but I was curious with him, like whether or not it was him thinking, how do I reach a wider market with this? Like, I feel strongly enough about these concepts, but if I just talk God, it's going to get dismissed by anyone who doesn't, possess that particular faith system. But I asked the guy two questions, and I'll share his response, and then you guys can answer the same two questions. So the two questions I asked him were, what, how is this book beneficial to you as a man? And how is this book beneficial to you as a father? Those were the things where, right, like, because Manspace. So I was curious.
Father space.
And he shared three things that kind of stood out to him. He says, I love the following common sense principles it teaches, which help me as a man and a father, in my opinion. It eviscerates the concept that you will ever get rid of A, the need for hard work, B, suffering, and C, uncertainty. So much of pop culture and psychology today teaches people to try and rid themselves of these things that are a part of our existence and can't be cured. When you have proper perspective, you don't feel as bad when you're having a tough time because you're supposed to experience it. So that was his first one, that those three things, right, are kind of the unavoidables. His second thing was that action leads to knowing. People spend a lot of time trying to figure things out before they act. That's backwards. You act first through experience, and then through experience, And the third one was trust your instincts. Real success means staying in a state of creation where you follow your instincts. Make a choice, see a consequence, act again. The result is not as important as what you are becoming in the process. So those were his three things. And like, I've got thoughts on lots of them, but I'm curious what you guys, like, what do you guys think? Like, as a man, what What's the benefit of this book?
I mean, it sounded very much like an old wise man talking to you about life in a lot of these situations.
Yeah.
And I think that Rob and I were saying, like, even though maybe these chapters felt a bit disjointed or kind of like almost like a grab bag of interventions in a way.
Mm-hmm.
If you sat down with him and had sessions, like that would come through in a very orchestrated, tailored way. And I think that the ideas that he's presenting there are kind of like, forward moving in the sense that you have to face all of these things if you're going to get to anything beyond just kind of some of the themes we've talked about in other books, just that comfort zone. And there's no way to ultimate freedom and happiness except through all of these things. So, the more time we spend trying to protect ourselves from all of these things, the stronger those feelings of fear become, and the softer you become in terms of your ability to face some of those challenges. So I think a lot of these things kind of resonate with probably some of the things we were told growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the importance of a book like this now is like, here's this really wise, compassionate person saying there's value in this versus what's been labeled as toxic. Same ideas, just presented in a different way by somebody who's trying to hold on to their own ego by doing some of these things, right? It's like, ironically, when you talk about these same concepts from a place of ego, it's like, that's really your comfort zone. That's not really growth. That's you just saying this is my man cloak that I'm wrapping around me and saying that I can face all these things. But he's talking about basically the only way you can do that is if you're tapped into a deeper source, where there's meaning and purpose to all of these things. It's not to prove yourself as an individual so much as to connect yourself to the whole by facing all these things. This is kind of the way of life. This is the way of everything, right? And so you have to lean into those things. And sadly, I don't think we have, and I guess it falls to us, right? We don't really have wise mentors and teachers like this all around us. They're therapists now. They're thought leaders now. They're, they're kind of a step away from us, but.
Which was
I ended it just like the book.
You ended it, but and then go ahead, Mike.
To me, I think that was something he pointed out that we know other cultures do better than we do.
Yeah.
But just there was, I think the whole chapter, he kind of, valuing age.
Yeah.
And, here they move into this place where we stop valuing what they have to contribute. And that's a huge mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're, there are people with this kind of wisdom all around us. I think societally we've kind of said, well, if you're a therapist, okay, cool, you can fill that role. Or if you're a thought leader, right, like a pastor or some other kind of, then cool, you can fill that role. But the guy next door hanging out in his coveralls, not him. But I that was one of the things that said, I was like, no, there is value in that, anywhere. Anytime you're willing to open yourself up to someone else's story, to hear what they have and to hear what they've learned, I think there's potential to learn something for yourself.
I think there's maybe 4 things we'll say that stood out to me. I don't know if they all stood out to me or if there's just some things I want to say about them. Well, this is maybe a 5th one. I did think just that idea of I actually find it kind of encouraging. I feel encouraged often when I stop feeling in a scarcity mindset, when I read something that somebody else is saying exactly what I've thought. Because it feels like, oh, there is truth out there. And it's not limited to one person to discover it. I did think it was funny, by the way, when he mentioned Jung and he talked about discovering. Did he say he discovered the archetypes or something? It's like, you make it sound like they're just out there instead of he just framed it this way. But anyway, I actually like the idea that like this truth is out there, period. Like Stutz did not come up with something that no one's ever said before. A lot of the principles that he talks about are spread across all sorts of therapies. Not to mention non-therapy type places, philosophies, and all sorts of things. So
yeah, he referred a lot to like the ancients.
Right. But for him, clearly he felt like, hey, this is the way it made sense to me. And that's, I would have liked a little better if you just proposed it that way. Let me show you how this stuff came together for me. But actually, this is the first thing the four things that I feel like I really liked was actually the connection to a higher power kind of thing. The idea of creativity, the idea of you just got to jump into it and do it. And then the idea of, some stuff's just going to suck. Now, some of this stuff is because I feel like, well, this is stuff I feel like I believe in anyway. And maybe it is like what you're saying, Matt, I've been taught this, or maybe it was you, Mike, that I've been taught this my whole life, or, I think it's interesting. I was listening to it the first time and thinking when he keeps talking about, higher power, I picture he didn't say angels, but, people dressed in white robes, but it could be anything if you're not comfortable with that, which I do think he's trying to reach a broad audience.
Yeah.
I was running though and thinking, isn't it funny how we'll say maybe the universe, if that's, and it's like, so the universe is this thing. It's this entity that exists that just cares about me. Like, what is that? Isn't that just God? Aren't we just saying God? Like you're calling it the universe because you don't want to say God, but to say, it's like the universe, it has its own will, its own desire. So what? Yeah. So I feel like I do believe in that idea that I think it gives us a bigger sense of purpose and sense of identity to feel like my son was asking me this the other day. I don't remember even what we were talking about. Or maybe it was my daughter. I don't know. But I said, in the end, people want to belong. Everyone wants to feel like they belong to something. Yeah. So people will group themselves because we want to belong to something bigger than us. And we can find mimicry of that, or we can find symbols of that, or whatever it is. But everyone, at some point, it's like, I need to be a part of something bigger. It's even being part of a family is something bigger than you. So I think that's important to know that part of our identity innately is to feel like we are a part of a bigger thing. And I call it God. Because if you say the universe, it makes so God. But I get it. I don't know. But the other couple ideas are things that I've thought a lot about lately for myself. Actually, Matt, in this podcast, when he talks about, I don't know if you guys remember, but he mentions that he just kind of uses the hypothetical example of a donut shop. If you want to open a donut shop and you're thinking, is chocolate or vanilla better? How do we know which one? You can sit there forever and never open the donut shop. And Matt and I, before we brought Mike on, maybe Mike was the catalyst, but we sat for like 2 years trying to figure out how to do this podcast. I listen back sometimes.
We were making donuts.
I still have some of our old recordings. I'm like, oh, it was painful.
It's funny though. I bet if we had just started posting those, we would have gotten here.
I know it would have been. But just the idea of like, you just get out there. It doesn't need to be something polished and perfect. You put it out, and then you refine and you refine and you refine until it's like, oh, now I'm in a better spot. I think that it takes guts, and I like the idea of action and his idea of you commit and you follow through, and you commit and you follow through, and it's kind of constantly connecting you and your present and your past. But I also really love the idea. This is something I started to feel like for me, and then I started to feel like I was seeing it in clients, was the idea of, I don't know if this is exactly how he phrased it, but I think innately we are creators. All humans are designed to be creators in some way. And if we're not creating, then our sense of identity drops, and that means we're going to be depressed and we're going to be anxious and we're going to feel off. My practice has gotten to a point where I can just leave it and it will kind of just maintain itself, but all creativity like sucks out of me. And so it becomes monotony, and I get depressed, and I start slipping into a scarcity mindset where if I'm not careful, I'll lose this thing. Rather than pushing myself to be a creator in something, which would require this last piece of it's going to suck. Like you're going to do some stuff and you're going to take it on the chin. And that is by design to take things on the chin. It's the only way that we actually, this goes back to the comfort crisis that we read. It's like, it's the only way we actually push ourselves forward is that there's something pushing against us when there's not. Like my wife and I were walking and talking about how our culture is kind of weird. Like everything's so easy for us now. Like I really don't, like, I don't even have, if I'm in bed and I don't want to get out because it's cold, I can just say to my phone or to my thing in my room, oh, okay, Google, turn on my lights, turn off my fan, and it will. Like, because we went camping the other night and I didn't put we didn't put the rain fly up. Yeah, because I like sleeping out like that. Yeah. The problem is it doesn't. There's nothing to trap heat in, so it gets cold, and then there's nothing to stop the cold from just dropping down onto you. So by the time you wake up, it's like, I don't want to get out of this bed. But when you're camping, you have to. Yeah. Like, so there's going to be this discomfort, and it feels better. So I do like that he says at some point, like, you just kind of have to commit to, like, this is going to be a struggle, and that's what it is, and that's fine. And Matt and I talked about this a little bit while we were playing darts, which, sorry, Mike, I mean,
it's okay. I couldn't play it anyway. I'm at home.
Yeah. That's true.
Oh, right. They can throw books.
I got a bookshelf behind me.
Throw books at the wall.
That was a bullseye, guys. All right. I don't remember what we talked about.
When we were playing darts?
Yeah, it was just something
we talked about was how bad I sucked that first game.
No, I was going to say, just there's something in there about just the idea that, like things are, sometimes it just sucks, and you just got to, it was something wrong. We didn't say it this way, but the idea of, like, acceptance therapy, it's like telling clients, like, yeah, this just sucks. You got to close your heart off. Like, some things you need to not care as much about. Like we need to stop feeling as much as we feel. It's okay to acknowledge and see and recognize the feeling, and not be like, well, it needs to overwhelm me and take over everything. It's like, no, just say, I don't like this feeling, and then go do the thing anyway. And that, to me, like, I think there's, even though this is disjointed, there are themes in this book that, to me, feel like this is a way. There's various ideas in here that you could take any one chapter and build on, in terms of, this is how you be a better man. Like, there's a lot, the stuff about parenting, even that stuff, there's principles across the parenting stuff. He's basically like, yeah, your kids are going to have to, like, he tells that story about when he was a kid growing up, and he pushed another kid, and some lady, he had no idea who she was. She grabbed him and started yelling at him. Yeah.
And all the other parents were like,
yeah,
good
get
job.
It. And I think I told you one of my favorite things about was about an Instagram reel I saw. Some kid is being a total brat, and then this random stranger walks up and yells at the kid, "Hey, your mom's an effing saint!" And it was like, I was like, oh, that's freaking awesome. Anyway, so I feel like there's actually various messages in the principles of this, but Matt's right. Like, if you're looking for, like, here's this coherent theme across, I think there are some themes, but they ebb and flow.
Well, maybe your friend would know better, Mike, because I just read, like, some previews of the tools book, and I read the table of contents, and it looked a little bit more like there was some of the, like, the connecting points between these tools that he talks about in this book. But I think one of the other ones that I have, like, as I've tried to lean into it more, one of these principles, I've experienced both like really deep connection and happiness, and also, like, massive regression from where I started before I went in that direction. Like, this big kind of, like, pendulum swing that always happens with any sort of change, but the active love stuff where, you're, I think what makes it work, and to throw back to the ever so popular Celestine Prophecy book, one of the
which
concepts
I still
in
think
that
about
book,
every once in a while. Every once in a while, I'll hear something and I'll be like, oh.
Again, it's one of those, like, man, great ideas, horribly executed.
Oh, yeah. But, execution's brutal.
Yeah, but the idea that, like, when you tap into a source greater than yourself for something like love, and you regularly connect with it for that reason, then you have massive capacity to feel whole and extend that out to other people, and especially, like you said in this book, even if you hate the person, right?
Yeah.
Not because they have earned it or they deserve it or any of that, but because it's what you feel and you want to experience that feeling and you want to give that, or experience that. But it's crazy how much, like, as I've done, like, as he's talking about some of these exercises, it's like, worded differently or whatever, his own take on it, but same idea. I've felt like both, like, way deeper connection to the people in my life than I have before, and also like massive paranoid insecurity. And I'm like, man, like, as you start to grow, it just really does reveal that, like, shadow part that that wants to yank you back. And it's been hard to like it hasn't caused me to doubt the value in moving in that direction, but I think we think sometimes, like, once I start moving in a direction of growth, then everything else will get easier.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, actually everything gets, like, massively harder, but massively more rewarding. And as you keep moving in that direction, things do start to shift more permanently, but I can see why people are, really dissuaded by any change efforts initially, because stability and certainty, even if it sucks, is always more predictable, more comfortable, and you can find a million reasons to kind of talk yourself out of something that could be better.
Well, and it is one of the sections that kind of stood out to me was the section on motivation. Because for me, like, I've always been driven by deadlines. I pretty much read this book in a day and a half. Where
Shame.
I know.
The last
Big
day and a
surprise.
half, perhaps?
Yeah, pretty much.
I read it twice, everybody. Rob cares the most.
Well, you
Spaceman.
listened to it.
I love you more than all these other people.
That's because you just link it to your exercise habit, which is already rock solid, and you're over there taking atomic dumps with your atomic habits.
It's the funniest gif. Like, it's like a comment stream about this kid who's, like, strapped into a toilet seat, and it talks about atomic pooping, we'll call it. And it's like he's pooping his way across the universe. I have to show it to you guys. It's so funny. Anyway, sorry, Mike, continue.
No, but it was just that, like, yeah, I do great when I'm up against a deadline. Like, I lived that way in college. Every paper I wrote, except for one, I wrote the night before it was due. Like, I was really good at it. And one of the things that I've struggled with now that I don't have so many responsibilities, because I have a job that actually provides for me and my family, it's been really hard to get that motivation back. Like, before, I always had so much to do that I couldn't stop. Now I can, but I've really kind of struggled with the motivation to keep moving. Right. And you distract me with the atomic pooping thing, Rob. And so now I can't remember how this relates back to what Matt was saying. Thanks a lot.
Because, like, I just found it is so funny.
No, you were saying something about deadlines, and I was talking about love before that. So I don't know.
I know. And that's, like I said, it connected in my head, and I can't remember now how it connected because I got distracted by Rob's atomic pooping.
Well, we were talking about change, and as you start making change, like, the resistance to that change matches it. Like, the matches your growth.
Maybe that was it. Like, this, I think when it's like, it's easy to do something when it's new and when it's right, a positive thing that we feel. But typically, and we'll see this with people in therapy, they'll reach a certain point and they're like, okay, I'm good. I don't need to keep coming. And it's like, I can still see lots of stuff we should be talking about, but they're like, no, I'm good. And they just kind of reach that place where they're like, okay, it's fine. And a lot of it is they don't want to do that work to keep pushing forward. They reach that place where they're comfortable, and so they kind of stop. And I think, like, to your point, like, no, you're right. It's not like the more you focus on love, suddenly that shadow is going to go away. No, it's not going to go away. In fact, to me, love it's an expression of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And so I think, right, he'll talk about part X, which to me is the voice in the head. And he talks about the shadow self, which to me, I'm like, yeah, it's just our insecurities. Like that's how if I'm referring to these things. So I think, yeah, the more vulnerable you are, the more exposed your insecurities are. Like there's not going to be a lot to stop that. Mm-hmm. And so if you're, if you get to a point where you can't tolerate the discomfort, or you're simply like, no, I'm cool with this level of discomfort, I'll just stay here, the growth stops. You have to find ways to kind of keep yourself moving. That's how it tied back in, I think, in my head to the idea of self-motivation. Mm-hmm. Like you can't rely on the process to keep you moving. You have to find other ways to keep yourself moving. You have to be committed to, like you found, you had to be committed to this process of like, no, I'm going to be more expressive of this. I'm going to, practice active love more, so that, like regardless of of the discomfort I feel along the way. I think that's what I was going
good
for.
Connection.
I got nothing.
I thought it was interesting, the idea too, and this goes back to the idea of accepting things, but some of his kind of interventions or activities were like, essentially imagine that shadow self and embrace it. Like being able to, a couple of times I would try to pull some things out and say, what if that part of me that's that weak part that I don't like or whatever it is, how would I pull that in and like accept it or have compassion for it or whatever. That I thought, I like that idea of actually in some ways, and I don't know if the book was getting at this or this is just where my thoughts went, but this idea of like, for me to really move forward in this, it's not a pendulum swing of I got to get away from that. It's saying that is a part of me that I know is there. Sometimes if I let it be, or if my whatever comes out, it's like, but instead saying, I recognize this is something and I can move past this. Mm-hmm. I think that's very different than I have to erase this part of me like I'm ashamed of it, instead of saying we all have that kind of shadow self.
Right. Like the integration of those things really is probably like still the answer to that dilemma is still active love, right? It's the part of yourself that feels unlovable, that feels like unworthy to be in a space where you're allowing yourself to experience that much love and extending it to other people.
Yeah.
And being able to reintegrate through compassion, active love, whatever you call it, right? I think he talked in there about how he doesn't like the term self-love because it just sounds like one of those good ideas with no implementation, right? Yeah. And that's when he kind of broke it down into step by step. And it's similar in a lot of ways to, like Carl Jung had like 4 main archetypes, and Dick Schwartz IFS stuff is like, it's a lot of the same concepts. And I think the cool thing about that is you can take a common experience and you can have, at least in this case, 3 different people talk about this is what it is, this is how you work with it, and then everybody finds something that speaks to them and works the best for the way that they're trying to work through that. Like when I got into IFS for a while there, it's like most approaches to therapy just become so kind of overwhelming and hard to wrap your head around because somebody else developed them. Mm-hmm. So you take bits and pieces of it that you can make sense of, and then you integrate it into your own way of being, which is why I hate all the certification routes, right? Because it's like,
oh yeah,
come do this the way that I did it. And, instead of maybe take some things that work, like just the idea, like you said, of part X or like archetypes or, protectors in IFS or whatever. Take the ideas of like inside we're all fragmented, and a huge part of our work is to get acquainted with all of those different fragmented parts of ourselves, how they relate to each other, experience some sort of coherence around that, and then do that externally as well, right? Like, he's talking about even people you hate, maybe especially people you hate, right? If you can feel this feeling toward them, imagine what that can do internally for the parts of yourself that you hate, right? Or that you want to hide or that you're ashamed of, or, and I think it's very hard to do that without the spiritual piece that he talks about.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's not coming from somewhere larger than me, then I'm going to always feel inadequate to be able to do that kind of work.
I think it's something I just thought of too as you were saying this, because I was thinking about how my theory of therapy that I presented for qualifying exams that actually now is probably blended a little bit. It's probably more what Steve does, but it's Whitaker symbolic experiential, and probably mixed now, I'd say, with Boehnian natural systems differentiation of self, that kind of thing. But when I remember reading it at the end of when I had settled on this is my theory because it already aligns with what I think and believe.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, Whitaker, they were saying, well, how do you, could you manualize this? And he said, no. He said, I could not tell you, go in the room and be me.
Yeah.
You have to go in the room and be you.
Mm-hmm.
The guiding principles are these things. And that's actually something that I thought about too, is, like as Mike, your second question of what is it, how does this help you as a father? And actually, even for spacemen, like these episodes that we have, or the books, if they read these books, it's like, well, nothing should ever replace your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like it shouldn't replace your life narrative. It should be saying, well, how does this fit with what I already believe? What if I believe needs to be shaved off or smoothed out? And what if this part, I'm going to take these things, but not these things. And thinking about how he said something in this book, and I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it was kind of like essentially your kids are going to, when you're older, and a good, solid, older, wise person isn't trying to offer his input on his kids' lives. It's like they're living their own lives. If they want input, I'll share if they ask, but I'm not going to just share it with them. And thinking, no, there's principles I've tried to teach my kids. Now I don't want them to go become new me's. Like go become you in this process. Like you should be figuring out your own things and tackling your own problems. And so I like that idea of, what you're saying, Matt, because that's what I found funny when he's like, I discovered it. I found that, and it's like, you mean you're borrowing a bunch from Jung, and you mentioned before you even mentioned Viktor Frankl. I was like, sounds like Viktor Frankl. And then he mentions Viktor Frankl. I was like, but it's like, yeah, he's saying, well, this is how this fits in the way I view things.
It is interesting though to hear everybody's take on the thesis of that book.
Oh yeah,
Man's Search for Meaning, because
so
I've heard
different.
like his was that once you lose faith, you die.
Right.
I've heard other people say like once you lose purpose, you die. Once you lose hope, and those are all closely related. But yeah, it's just interesting because I wouldn't have taken it in that direction, but he was tying it into spirituality. I took it more to mean like, once I guess those people was like, I guess in that sense he's saying faith that the Allied forces are coming once they didn't, right?
Yeah.
It's like, but for him, I thought it was more like everything I'm learning will serve me to be a better psychiatrist when I'm out of here.
I think I think maybe that Stutz was just taking that one example to illustrate that point maybe. But because I agree with you. I take different things from that book sometimes too. It's like, oh, that's not what I took from it, but that's okay. And that's the nature of, it's like reading that book, I and Thou, that was translated from German into English. And it's like, this is my best summary of what they were trying to get at, but there's some things I'll translate. But anyway, I think we've veered off a little bit. Mike, bring us back together.
Well, I one of the things is, Matt, like as you were talking about kind of that active love and learning how to embrace your shadow self, that's how it refers to it. Anyway, one of the things that kind of stood out to me is like all of this stuff when he talks about, taking a look at this person that you are, at no point does he say you need to share it with other people. You need to get them to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
It's always an internal thing. Like you have to accept it. Like he's not saying you have to go share this with everyone else. they all need to know your insecurity. No, they don't need to know your insecurity. You need to know and accept your insecurity. You need to become comfortable with that aspect of yourself. And I even like that he's like, you don't have to like it.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine if you don't like that. Like, but accept it as, you know, like, and some of it, I look back at some of the things that, because I like, you know, as I was reading about that section, I started thinking about like, I wonder what my shadow self would be, right? Like with the one person, it was the example that he shared was the lady who came from a chaotic and poverty-ridden home and kind of got out
model.
by her looks and then wasn't accepted by the, you know, all the parents and it was a very clear thing. And I thought, I don't think mine would. I think mine would be more like a series of, you know, these are the parts that I'm like, oh, please don't ever find that part out.
Yeah.
Like, it's cool. But it did make me question, like, how much time do I spend trying to get away from that? Trying to say, I'm not that guy. Where, yeah, I might not still be that guy. I was once.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still in there. Like,
Yeah.
and if I don't learn to accept it, then it's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I like that.
Yeah.
Because I love, and I do think systemic is kind of a more holistic way to see people is systemically. But I do appreciate, like, I feel like I've worked with so many people lately where it's, well, but this person and this person and this person. And I'm like, you can't do anything with what those people are doing. Like, you can only look at what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So start looking at what you're doing and see where that goes. And so it was kind of refreshing to me that a lot of what he was saying is like, look, there's an aspect of this that is completely internal and self-based. Like he spent a chapter or so talking about, he never called it this, but I'm sure you guys would, the differentiation of self.
Yeah, he gets at that.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, like I've always felt like that's a key aspect in any relationship, is being well differentiated and recognizing, no, I am still my own individual. And these are the things I'm bringing to the relationship. I don't need to mold myself to be the version of Mike that, you know, Jenner wants me to be. Mm-hmm. I need to know who I am and be that version of who I am. Mm-hmm. So I appreciated that kind of, yeah. What were your takeaways?
Well, I feel like we talked about it. But
I would say like maybe we already do it.
No. I
would the take home for this episode.
I think I would just I would build off of what you just said. The idea of having in the shadow, right? Maybe is another way of wording it. Parts of yourself that you don't like, and you're invested in, keeping yourself away from and keeping everybody else away from. Another way to think of it is like when Brene Brown talks about like, what's your shame story, right? And I think a lot of people, you think of the shadow as kind of cloaked in shame, right? And so we want to stay as far away from that as possible. I think when people, like when people say, I don't care what other people think, my first reaction is like, you care more than most people, right? If you say that, because that's a really hard line stance on nobody's going to touch my shame or get me into my shame. So I'll either throw it out there, I'll throw my shadow parts out there in like a really off-putting way so that everybody goes away, and then I've accomplished it. No one's going to get close to me anyway, right? Or I'm telling you, I'm never going to talk to you about that by saying like, I don't care. But I think the real power that it's weird because it ends up being maybe a new kind of comfort zone, but I think it's more like a zone of like freedom and growth when I can say those parts of me that I once was invested in keeping hidden from myself, from others, right? Or like indulging in when no one else was around, right? Like I feel very differently toward them, both in like a love and compassion perspective, but also in like I can direct them type of a way. Then there's no investment in me changing your behavior, because the only reason I was doing that would be to have you give me something that I wasn't able to give myself, because I'm like still at odds with my shadow and like kind of, fragmented internally, or I'm trying to like change your behavior so that you don't poke at something that makes me see it or you see it. And to your point, like when we're working with people and they're talking about so-and-so, right? I think it's easy just to get lost in like, yeah, that's horrible that they're doing that. And that's like, that's wrong behavior on their part. And that would be true in a lot of cases. You could go down the path of like, well, why are they doing it and stuff like that? But then you're talking to somebody about somebody else. But yeah, if you go inward where it's like, okay, when they do that, I guess you have to start with what do you do in return. But I think ultimately we're all trying to get to that place of like, what part in you does that activate or bring you closer to, that you do everything you can to stay away from? And what if that relationship changed? What if that inward process were different for you, for you? How would you view their behavior if that was true, right? If it's like, yeah, it's still abusive, well, cool, then let's get out of that situation. Right, if it's like, well, you know what, I'd see it differently, maybe that's where we spend all of our time, right? And helping you to become more whole with yourself. And I say this like it's just like we talked about, change is super freaking hard. It's not so much that saying that, asking that question, thinking about it changes it. It's just maybe that's like the right path to start walking down. That's the right destination to start heading toward. And it's really freaking hard, but it's worth it. Any gain in that direction is worth it. But yeah, really hard work, just like you said.
Yeah, I think that's actually, mine's a similar thing. I think it is, the thing that I took most from this was like engage in a process of betterment that is difficult. Like it will be hard, but when you connect yourself to a higher power, to God, to something bigger than you, it becomes like there's a bigger sense of purpose in it. And I think it makes, this is why I like Viktor Frankl so much. I think it makes life more meaningful when you recognize I'm here not to have ease or I don't know, freedom from discomfort. Like I'm here because there's meaning in this and I can find meaning in all points. And when that happens, I think you don't have to wait to know, will this work perfectly? I don't know. I have this idea, pursue it, go forward, see what happens. And then it's okay because you're not thinking, well, I'm a failure if this does not succeed. Talked a lot about, he mentions envy for a while in there. And I was like, I totally have this problem. I measure my success by what people can see externally from me, how much money I have or what I've accomplished in my career. And I don't want to do that. And I have this envy of like other people's successes because it means I'm not going to have it, I guess. And I thought, I don't want that to be my guiding principle of, I reached the end of my life and it's like, how was it? It's like, well, it could have been better. It could have been like Johnny's life. His was pretty amazing. Put his obituary in my place. So just being able to like go and push forward, to know, I think it's so significant to know and to teach my kids to know. I actually thought my kids, we listen to self-help books sometimes. For some reason, they get interested in them when we're on road trips. And I thought they'll like this one. It's short and it's kind of topic punchy, I want my kids to know like, hey, yeah, sometimes life is rough and that's okay. Like that's part, you're engaging in something and that's on purpose. So that's not even necessarily one of the things that he was trying to say, but I feel like it's on purpose. Life is sometimes difficult and you engage in it. So do that. Did you have one more, Mike?
I think like to me, one of the big, I guess, overarching themes was just this idea of it felt like in indirect ways he was just talking about mindfulness and just being pretty present. Like, yeah, a lot of these things, like I still struggle with it. But I struggled for a long time with, I can see, I can see pretty easily why things won't work. And when I'm trying to make plans to move forward, I would get lost in that because I could always just see a potential problem and a potential problem and a potential problem. And I remember I was on a committee and I was kind of in charge with it. And this guy was planning an activity for us. And I said, Kate, but keep in mind, these things. And he looks and he goes, well, like, do we know those are problems? And I was like, well, no, but they could be. And he goes, it's fine. We'll worry about it if they show up. And it was like, he was clearly just like, no, dude, I'm going to start moving forward. And so to me, that comes back to mindfulness. Look, that's too far down the road. I don't know. I know what's right in front of me. So I'm going to deal with what's right in front of me. And what's right in front of me is the next step. I'm going to do this thing. You said get started. So cool. I'm going to find us a location, because that's the next step I can take. And I think there's a lot of benefit in recognizing those things, of recognizing like, that's not where I am. I'm not 10 steps down the road. And it's possible that I'll never get there. And so I'm just going to figure out what the next thing is and I'm going to do it. And that idea of like, the more you engage in that action, it might not always work out. But that forward movement is going to be encouraging for you. It's going to keep you saying, well, I can do the next thing now. There's something about engaging that keeps us moving.
Well, there you have it, spacemen. Wise words from a man who knows how to ski. Our next book, Matt has selected, we all kind of selected, is The Eden Project.
Yes. Let me pull it up. Sorry.
Not to be confused with the new movie, which is based on
The Eden Project in Search of the Magical Other
By
James Hollis. Narrated by not this actor, but
a guy who sounds like the dude from Pitch Perfect, one of the judges.
So just a little disclaimer. You're going to hate this guy's voice and his like cadence, but just imagine that guy and
Then
it'll make it better.
So before we go, I'm gonna describe this picture to listeners, and then I'll show you guys the picture. This is the it's a picture of a little boy on a toilet. He's wearing his clothes. He's fully dressed. Don't worry. This is advertising a booster toilet seat, and it's got a thing for his feet, so his feet are up, and his legs are strapped to the seat, and his arms he's like locked into place with this bar thing, and he's smiling. But
this is a toilet.
It's a thing for your kids so that they can poop well on the toilet. Right?
Oh,
and
gotcha.
So it's on the toilet, and then it's got a series of comments from people like about this toilet. And the first one, I'll show you guys the picture, but the first one is, why are there straps on his legs? I'm laughing so hard. The second one says, power to main thrusters. The next one says, all systems are go. And then the next one says, and I'll clean this up for this podcast, it says, turbo poop. And then the next one says, but he's still wearing his pants. This is my favorite. It says, pants aren't an issue when you're quantum pooping through the nth dimension. You guys can see this picture.
Now hold on. Make sure you're all strapped in,
through
little
the
Johnny.
nth dimension. Kid strapped in.
Dude, that is like such an example of over-engineering safety with potty training.
Your kid, but he looks so happy, and look at that haircut. I mean, you can't get better than that. He's like, that's like Dumb and Dumber right there in the future. All right, well, spacemen, go read the book. Go get the next book, and then come back next time and catch us on the Manspace quantum poop.